into that. But before we do get stuck into that, I need to plug a couple of things first of all, because you know me, I love to do shameless plugs. First thing is the podcast is now available on Apple, on Spotify, and on Google. So if you simply search the StattoJoe podcast, it should take you there. Or in the description for this video, I have the links to both the Spotify and Apple podcast versions of these podcasts. So be sure to check them out whenever you can. If you miss the full stream or if there's bits you missed, you can go back and you can listen to those. Look, talk us through that game that we just saw tonight between Chelsea and Real Madrid.
Chelsea versus Real Madrid, the second leg of the Champions League semi-final, taking place in Stamford Bridge, London, Chelsea's home stadium. And it was set up to be a really, really interesting game. It was set up with many different ideas of what could happen and what would happen if either team scored first. And all of these things made it a really intriguing game going in. There's almost a bigger feel about this game than it potentially was last night, at least maybe in my mind anyway, because I kind of figured that City would hold on last night, whereas tonight I wasn't as sure. I wasn't sure if Chelsea would be able to hold on or, get a win or something. And so tonight we had the game set up really well. We had two really interesting teams coming out. What looked like a 4-3-3 on paper from Real Madrid, but in practice seemed to play like a 3-5-2. Kind of. So it's an intriguing one because I'm not sure if he tried to play a 4-3-3 going forward, and as soon as they lost the ball, there was that switch to a 3 at the back with wing backs. In that case, Vinicius Jr. was kind of all out of sorts, but we'll get on to that a little bit later. Chelsea lined up in their standard under Tuchel with the 3 at the back and wing backs, and I thought looked really, really solid on paper. A very exciting front 3 going into the game of Timo Werner, Havertz, and Mason Mount. Very, very good footballers, and it was an absolute joy to see them all starting together. The game started off, as you kind of expected it, a little bit nervy. You know, both teams were taking their time. They were feeling out the game, seeing how things were going to go and trying to go from there. And I thought both teams grew into it, but Chelsea grew into it slightly more. Chelsea, I think, ultimately had a better game, dominated for large points, even though they didn't have as much possession at times. There were very few moments when Real Madrid looked like they were going to do anything. Chelsea countered very well, played very good football, and came away with 2 goals and ultimately are in the final. Joe, what did you make of the game?
My first thought was, if you're watching that game as a Liverpool fan, you're going, how did we lose to this team? Like, they didn't show up tonight. Part of the problem for me was they played too many players who hadn't had enough game time, so they weren't up for the pace. Hazard, Ramos didn't really seem they're up to the usual standard we'd expect from them. Chelsea kind of outclassed them in most departments. Defensively, very, very solid. That's been consistent under Tuchel. Rudiger's a different player now, isn't he? He played his football tonight. He was sometimes up in the box more than flipping Werner was. But overall, Real Madrid just looked the second best team from the moment the game started, and they did have much more possession of the ball. Never really did much with it. They seemed to be held quite a lot in midfield. Benzema was marked out of the game. He in both games he managed to get the goal in the last one, but in this one I don't remember him doing anything apart from falling to the ground once. Vinicius looked poor. Hazard looked poor. Attacking, they didn't have much. Chelsea just, it was just one of those things. I titled it as Chelsea outclassed Real Madrid, and I think that's exactly how, in my eyes, that's how the game was.
I think tactically, Thomas Tuchel has done everything he's needed to do in this game, and has played a brilliant system with great players, and got a very good result out of his team. Zinedine Zidane showing a few times in the past that he's not as tactically aware almost. He was hampered by a lot of injuries this season, and he has done well to get what he has got out of the current bunch. But tonight I think they just didn't show enough anywhere. I think he played, as you said, too many risky players. Ramos really shouldn't have played this game, even though he's their best player, even though he's their captain, even though he is Mr. Real Madrid. He shouldn't have played. Hazard again has looked all out of sorts since he's come back. The best thing he's done for Real is honestly hard to think of.
Warm up the bench.
Yeah, one off the bench. He's very good as a bench warmer. But yeah, there's a lot of players who I thought had really good games for Chelsea. A couple of players for Real who had solid games. But who would you say, Joe, was your man of the match tonight?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know why Mason Mount came straight in my head, even though he didn't do much at the start. I thought Chilwell was great. I thought Rudiger was great. Oh, it's so difficult. A lot of the Chelsea players stepped up. Werner played well. I know his goal was a bit of a meme, but he played well. Havertz played well. Kante played well. I mean, there wasn't really anybody who didn't play well for Chelsea tonight.
It's interesting that you say that, Joe, because we'll maybe look at it a wee bit later, but some of the player ratings for Chelsea are very harsh. Kai Havertz here sitting on a 6.3, according to your favourite sofa score, which I think is incredibly harsh. But for me, I think man of the match should go to Edouard Mendy. I think he made a couple of phenomenal saves in the first half, especially, that had they gone in, the game was a very different game. Those two, especially if both of them had gone in, that would have changed everything. I think Mendy epitomized everything about that Chelsea team. Very solid, very composed, took time when he had the ball, distributed it well, made right decisions in the key moments. And I think that is what Thomas Tuchel football is. And I think he did a very good job at making it happen tonight. So, Edouard Mendy, you get the Luke Sherwin official man of the match for tonight. Well done, son.
Well, he might as well retire now. If
He
you
might
know
as well retire.
once you've got that, there's no going up from there.
You
Yeah,
effectively get you get the recognition as yes, you can do it in the cold, wet Tuesday night at Madrid.
yeah, ideal. Yeah, he made a cracking save in the first half, and really from there, then didn't really look like he was going to get beaten. Courtois didn't have a bad game either. He made a couple of good saves. Chelsea really should have scored about 4 or 5.
I think Chelsea made him look better tonight than
Maybe that's
he
fair.
played because Kante got played through, hit it straight at him. Havertz got played through, played it straight at him.
Yeah.
Mason Mount got played through, and when he should have just dinked it slightly over him, went for par and made it look like Courtois had rushed out well. But if you had a goal scorer on the ball there, if you had even Olivier Giroud, if you had on the ball there, he wouldn't have had the pace to get to it now. But hypothetically, had he been there, he would have dinked it over him and scored the goal. And Courtois made a few good saves, but nothing extraordinary.
Yeah, and we had sort of noticed that Real Madrid seemed to play, and Chelsea as well, almost played a different formation from when they were on the ball, from when they were off the ball. While it was slated as a 4-3-3 for Real Madrid, that ultimately was only the formation when they were on the ball. And as you said earlier, off the ball, they played a 5-3-2. Chelsea just had their fullbacks seemed to push up. So they almost went from a back 5 to a back 3 whenever they had the ball. Yeah. They let those wing backs go up and push forward. Chilwell I thought the left-hand side kind of tore Real Madrid apart. They couldn't really do much with that left-hand side. And actually the talk before the game was that Real Madrid's left-hand side would cause problems, when in reality it was Chelsea's left-hand side that caused the biggest problems.
It makes sense on paper though, doesn't it, Joe? Because you look at the Real Madrid team, on paper it was Nacho Fernandez looked like he was starting at the right, but when the game started, it seemed to be Militao was more at the right. Yep. And then Vinicius was there to support him. And when Vinicius Jr. is one of your main defenders, it's never going to be a good time. He's okay going forward occasionally, but like his ball control, his technique is nowhere near world class. And so to have him playing right back to try and dispossess some cracking attackers is a really big ask for such a young and inexperienced man who's not really played that position before. Down that left-hand side, Chilwell was phenomenal. Werner did very well, always making a run. And yeah, I just think Vinicius and Militao were lacking a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we look at the stats now very quickly, maybe not very quickly, but if we look at the stats, I think we kind of saw and you were saying about the player ratings. They are harsh. Like there's Chilwell's only on a 6.5, and Kai Havertz on a 6.3.
I do
But
think you could argue it though, Joe, because of how wasteful Chelsea were. I think that's what these are based on. For how many times Chilwell was down that left hand side and how many times he could have crossed it in, how many times he probably could have taken a shot. Only one key pass there, I think, could have been 5 or 6 key passes had he made the right decisions in a few moments. Kai Havertz, I feel like, played a really good game, but again, missed clear-cut chances, so probably
well,
suffered as a result.
there's Chilwell was lost the ball 14 times, which it's not great. Let's say if Havertz lost the ball 9 times, that's it's not bad. That's pretty standard. It is interesting though because in terms of like average ratings and things, you can see that Chelsea were overall the better side just based on their ratings in general. There's a lot more green in that picture for Chelsea than there is for Real Madrid.
Yes.
I think Mendy getting a 6.4. Yeah, I didn't really remember him doing much. Benzema simply got a 6.4 because he did nothing.
Yeah.
And that's about the height of it. And they did make a point, and I was absolutely loving this. I don't know if you picked this up from Glenn Hoddle. They were talking about how the stats in the first half would make you feel that Real Madrid were the better of the two sides. And Glenn Hoddle said, well, the stats don't show just how vulnerable Real Madrid looked at the back. And I went, yes, Glenn. That's exactly what I love to hear on national TV, chat about the stats. But actually, and this is part of the thing that I like doing as well, is looking at how actually sometimes the stats aren't a fair reflection of the game. Like, even if we look at that attack momentum meter and Real Madrid in blue, there's heavy periods of the game where Real Madrid appear to be on top. And I use that word lightly because they never felt like they were on top.
Yeah.
They never felt to me like, oh, this is dangerous a lot. But when you look at that, it seems like actually Real Madrid look like they've had the better of the game, that kind of blows my mind a wee bit.
I think that's a very kind statistic for Real Madrid. I don't think they played that way at all. And just an interesting stat, if you don't mind going just back up a little bit, the average age, I think, is a fascinating statistic to look at. And if I'm a Real Madrid fan, I would be slightly concerned because you've got an old average age there. You've got 29.6-year-old team. Real Madrid have a lot of really good young players, but Zidane isn't seeming to let them play. You look at the likes of Asensio, not that young anymore, but Zidane's never trusted him. Zidane's never given him a chance. Vinicius Jr. has only really come into the team in these last few weeks. He's never really been trusted either. Rodrigo looks the pick of the bunch, but why would you not start him in this game over Hazard?
Yeah.
But it doesn't make any sense. And you look tonight, Real Madrid have been hampered by playing a lot of games with a very similar team. They don't have the squad depth at the moment to rotate. They don't have the opportunity because of injuries to rotate. Luka Modric, Kroos, and Casemiro have played so many games this season. Luka Modric is 35, and he's being expected to be the midfield maestro in the middle. He's got no hope. He's going to be tired. Talking to a Real Madrid supporting friend recently, and he was saying that was the biggest issue, is that those three were being overplayed. Benzema was being overly relied on, and Ramos not being about meant that the defence couldn't really be swapped about either. When you've got a 30-year-old team, you need to rotate, and at the moment, they just can't. And that looked how they played tonight. They looked tired, they looked all over the place, and they just looked like a bunch of players who are really excited for the off-season. Except half of them will have to play at the Euros. That won't be good at all.
You do have to wonder, despite the fact that they hate each other, was it a big mistake letting Bale go? Now, I think as well they couldn't afford him anymore. But boy, oh boy, did they feel like they were missing something up front. And I know Bale's not at his peak anymore. He's not at his prime. But he showed on Monday night that he still has it in him to do it. He scored a hat-trick on Monday night. Do you know what I mean? He can still, regardless if it was against Sheffield United or not, to score 3 goals in the Premier League game against anybody is a big achievement. So
He can score
Maybe
3
there's
goals against a League One looking Sheffield United team. You're right, but I do think he would do a
so
job
harsh.
in La Liga. I do think he would. He's a good player, and he always has been. I think he would have done a job for Real Madrid this season. Would have scored a few more goals, especially Hazard being out. But the fact that there's players there, they should be playing, and they're not doing it either. Benzema is like the only player in Real Madrid who's scoring goals at all this season. Real
Mhm.
Madrid in general are just a bit out of sorts. They need signings. They need big money spent. They needed the European Super League to get money to do that, and yet now they're in a position where Real Madrid fans, rightfully so, should be concerned.
Yeah, and Karthik makes a great point about Tuchel kind of outclassing Zidane tactically, and we kind of briefly touched on that earlier about the way they were set up. Kind of, it was chalk and cheese almost. Um, if we look at the stats, now this is exactly what they were talking about on BT, but I actually think this is really interesting. So it was a 70-30 possession game, 70% pretty much in favour of Real Madrid. But Chelsea had double Real Madrid shots, so 15 shots to 7. And look, we had talked about this last week. Was it last Wednesday? We mentioned that we both felt that the way Chelsea would set up would be to play on the counter attack. That's exactly what
Yeah,
they did.
of course.
And they got double shots, so it paid off.
It paid
Both
off
teams
big
managing.
time. They have quick players,
Yeah,
younger
yeah.
players, coming back to that average age, 27-year-old average age, and that's inflated because Thiago Silva is like 40 and Rudiger's relatively old as well.
Mm,
Like there's certain players in there who are slightly older. Kante does not run like most people his age either, and they just completely out energized them.
yeah.
To use a weird phrase, they completely ran their socks off, and Chelsea played really well in the counter attack. You could see towards the end of the game how much running the team had done when Azpilicueta looked like he was dying. There was he burst forward towards the end, probably around 75 minutes, just before Reece James came on. Whatever minute that was, 80th. It was maybe around the 80th minute then. Azpilicueta sprinted down the right hand side, got into the box, had a little 1-2 or whatever with Pulisic, couldn't quite pull it off. Sprinted straight back because his heart is on the line. This is a game that he loves. And the camera closed in on him just as the ball went out for a throw in. A man looked like he was about to flop over on the floor. And so that shows me just how hard they're working. Fair play to them.
He looked exactly like I looked about 5 minutes into five-side on Monday night. So, we had a similar demeanor about ourselves at that stage. Really, really interesting though. I think this is fascinating. Chelsea had 7 big chances and missed 5.
Yeah.
And this comes back to something that we'll touch on in a second about Chelsea's stats since Thomas Tuchel came in. But they've played 24 games under Tuchel, and only once have they managed to score more than 2 goals in a game, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
But I think whenever you have the same number of big chances as your opponent has just shots, it just kind of shows you how almost to the end dominant Chelsea were on the attacking front.
Absolutely. And Chelsea have had a few different issues this season. At the start, they weren't scoring goals at all. Tuchel's come in and changed that around. Or they were scoring goals, but they also weren't. And then they were conceding loads of goals. Now they're very defensively sure, which is great. They're playing very intensely, as Karthik kind of notes here, very intensely, and they're getting a lot of chances. But their main issue now is that Timo Werner is not a natural goal scorer. Tammy Abraham, in my opinion, is, but doesn't seem to be playing. And Olivier Giroud is a natural goal scorer, but just doesn't have the legs to keep up with this Chelsea team. And so they're playing with a false 9, either in Havertz or playing with Werner as their main striker. And so big chances are going to come. If you play a ball through to those boys, they will get through and they will get the ball. They're quick. They're technically decent, but they just won't put the ball in the back of the net because the standard of goalkeeping in the Premier League is very high. Tammy Abraham should start, in Karthik's opinion. It's hard to disagree with.
Yep,
it's really hard to
disagree
with. Apart from the fact that Werner, he seems to play well and he seems integral to how they play. Karthik's kind of said that Tammy Abraham is their top goal scorer. Werner actually is their top goal scorer in all competitions and most assists as well, I think.
He's got so Timo Werner has 22 goal contributions this season, right? So for as much as Werner has been a bit of a flop, he's Chelsea's leading goal contributions. Like, he's got the most goal contributions this season for Chelsea. I know it's not a lot, but Chelsea have rotated a lot, or they certainly did under Lampard. They rotated a lot, which didn't really get, people, for Giroud would come in and score 4, but then would be on the bench the next week under Lampard because he was trying to keep the squad rotation going because we haven't had a pre-season. But now that Tuchel's come in, he's kind of started the same team, kind of consistently. So I think that does make a difference. But let's touch briefly on the Chelsea stats since Tuchel came in. So Tuchel came in on the 26th of January, right? Now, look, I haven't told you these off air. So, this is your first time hearing these as well. So I promise, guys, this is a natural reaction. Since Tuchel came in, tonight was their 24th game, right? They've played 24. Of those 24 games, they've won 16. They've drawn 6 and they've lost 2. Can you remember who they've lost to?
West Brom.
Mm-hmm.
And the other game they lost was, of course... no, it's not coming to me. Let's guess. Arsenal.
Porto in the Champions League.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
In those 24 games...
Did they not lose in the second leg against Atletico?
No, they won that 2-0.
Did they not win the first one,
They won the first one 1-0.
Okay. My bad.
I was on the Chelsea website. This is where I got these figures from. They've scored 32 goals in those 24 games, so really not that much. They're really only managing just over 1 goal a game. There's been a lot of 0-0 draws in those games. Well, I say a lot, though. I mean, they only drew 6 games, but there's been a fair few 0-0s. But how many goals... I'm going to ask you this as well to see what you think. In those 24 games, how many goals have they conceded?
Well, the 5 against West Brom really inflates it, but I'm going to say probably 11 or something.
Oh, so 10.
Oh, look at that.
And in 24 games, Chelsea have conceded 10 goals, and 5 of them were in one game.
Wow. So 5 goals in 23 games, if you look at it, apart from the one blip where Thiago Silva got sent off.
Mm-hmm.
That's ludicrous. That really is. That is a wild statistic. I think you've got to say fair play, Thomas Tuchel. You say he doesn't score an awful lot of goals, but why would you need to? He has them set up in a way that they're always going to get enough chances. And yeah, we'll get the goals. And yeah, Karthik said there in the chat, maybe bring it up on screen, that Chelsea fans feel that Tuchel has focused more on defence than attack. And I think he has, because the attacking foundations were already there. The attacking foundations were there because they have really good attacking options. You can't buy Timo Werner, Kai Havertz, and Hakim Ziyech in the summer and then not expect to have a good attack. But defensively, bringing in Thiago Silva should have been a masterstroke, and yet Lampard just couldn't quite get it going. But Thomas Tuchel has done a really good job.
Jack says Big Sam eats Tuchel for breakfast, which, 5-2, the 5-2 win would, certainly back up your claim. They've only met once, Jack, and Big Sam won. So, big record for Big Sam against Tommy Tuchel. Do you know what I mean?
So true.
What I was going to say there also was, when it comes to the goal scoring, it comes back to what we touched on Sunday about that German efficiency, the stereotypical German efficiency. Another 2-0 win again tonight. A lot of 2-0 victories in Tuchel's under Tuchel when I was looking through the scores. A fair few 0-0s and 1-0. Interestingly, now I want to make sure I've definitely remembered this correctly, but I'm pretty sure in any game that Chelsea have played against the top 6 in the Premier League, they haven't conceded. So I think they beat Liverpool 1-0. They drew 0-0 with Man United. Can't remember who else it is. I know they play City on Saturday, which is a wee dress rehearsal for the Champions League final.
They played the other week as well.
Yeah, and they did concede, actually. Didn't they concede in the FA Cup semi-final? Or was it 2-1? Was that 1-0? I can't remember what the score was. 2-0. Another 2-0. Another Tommy 2-0 Tuchel, we should call him now. That will be his nickname on our podcast from now on. But yeah, overall, over the 2 legs, definitely definitely deserved from Real Madrid. Not Real Madrid, Chelsea. What am I saying?
Wow, you've absolutely flipped the tables there. You've turned everything on its head.
Real
You're right.
Madrid robbed.
So true. If you ask Andrew Herrera, he'll say Real Madrid are wrong.
Yeah. Well,
crazy.
That's a good segue into last night's match, which was probably one of the most mental games of football I've ever witnessed live. Well, certainly the last 20 minutes were like a WWE match.
Absolutely.
What were your thoughts during the game, after the game, all that stuff last night?
I was buzzing during the game because that was a really fun football match to watch. It was really enjoyable to watch, especially from a neutral standing, where I wanted Man City to go through, but at the end of the day, I didn't really care. Like, I would have been fine either way. Wasn't going to go crying like Ander Herrera. So it was fine. But the game was perfect by Manchester City. That's probably one of the most complete performances I think we've seen from Man City since Pep took over, since, Sheikh Mansour, whatever he's called, unless that's the WWE superstar I've accidentally just referenced, since they've come in, one of the most complete performances against a solid enough PSG team. But I do think we'll touch on briefly, PSG are not what they seem to be. They are not the team that everyone has them hyped up to be. And I think they've rode their luck a little bit this season because they have a ridiculously good attack. But in general, after the game, I was thinking fair play. I found a renewed love for Fernandinho yesterday in his pure scumbaggeriness.
Oh, you do love to see it, though.
He's one of those players that cut from the same cloth as Patrick Vieira and the like. He was just such a scumbag last night. But it worked absolutely brilliantly and ensured that the game finished 2-0.
And again, thinking of how to describe this game, I've said that Man City humbled PSG. I think that's the best way I could put it, because they absolutely sat them down, in my opinion. They taught them a lesson, not only in maturity, not only in professionalism, but also their defence. We'll maybe get into the defending stats later on, because they are unbelievable. Like, they're so good. But the game overall, for me, was just like another strange one. Again, in a similar way to tonight's game, PSG were kind of going for the attack, and then City picked them off. I mean, that second goal is one of the most complete counter-attacking goals you'll ever see. If you want to watch a textbook version of a counter-attacking goal, watch the second goal, study it, read it over, look at what they did and how they did it, because that was like perfection in a counter-attacking goal. So good.
Pep Guardiola is known for dominating possession. He's known for having a lot of the ball, and yet in this game, Man City scored a goal from a goal kick and then scored a perfect counter-attack. They showed last night that they are not just a pretty face, but can get down in the nitty-gritty, wet those hands and get in with it, I thought they did a really good job with that. Man City did look, a really good performance all around. From this game, it's a lot easier, I think, to pick our man of the match. If we had to pick somebody that stood out, Riyad Mahrez, what a season he's having.
So good. Excellent. He got man of the match in the League Cup. He was man of the match in last week's game against PSG. He's man of the match again in this week's game against PSG. By the stats, I'm not 100% sure if he got man of the match. He probably did get man of the match overall, but sometimes the stats and who the pundits give man of the match differ because the stats are very beneficial to players who score goals, whereas pundits will look at overall performances. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. There's Ruben Dias only got a 7.4, where in reality he was probably one of the best players on the pitch. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where the stats can be a bit difficult to agree with sometimes.
To suggest that Marquinhos and Ruben Dias effectively had the same game, I think is wild. And to suggest that Verratti and Fernandinho had the same game is also wild. And so sometimes, these stats aren't quite all they seem to be. City have needed to mature. These players are players that haven't necessarily all come from big teams. They've been signed, You've signed Ruben Diaz in from Portugal, you've signed John Stones from Everton, Kyle Walker from Tottenham, Riyad Mahrez from Leicester, Gundogan in from Dortmund, Kevin De Bruyne in from Wolfsburg. Man City have spent an awful lot of money, but they haven't signed players from other big European teams, and that has shown in Europe over these last few years.
Mm-hmm.
They've needed to mature. They've needed to get to be players that know what they're doing on the biggest stage in world football, on Champions League nights like last night, where they needed to be calm and composed, and they were, and PSG were not. Fair play to Man City.
Andy says that him and Ruben Diaz are basically the same age. How sad is that? That is pretty sad. That's, but that's Trent Alexander-Arnold and I share the exact same birthday to the year, and he's won the Champions League. He's been in 2 Champions League finals, and he's won the Premier League and Champions League, while I have sat in my room and done a maths degree. So that makes me feel, really happy about how my life's gone.
And yet, Joe, you get to be friends with me. So who's the real winner?
Trent Alexander-Arnold.
You're absolutely right. It is Trent Alexander-Arnold every single day of the week.
Yeah. If we look again, let's look at the stats and we'll chat more. We'll do a bit more wap. Possession was more even last night, 56 for PSG. But I think that really came. Did they have more? No, in fact, it was exactly the same in both halves. Interesting. PSG edged shots very slightly, but this is where it's shocking. 14 shots and not a single shot on target. In fact, only 5 went off target because the rest were blocked. I think that kind of shows you what kind of game the Man City defence had last night, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It really does. I think
City
Man City
12.
had a lot of chances.
Sorry.
They did have a lot of chances. It's quite all right. They had 12 shots in total throughout the game. On target, 5. And they made those chances count, though. You compare that to the likes of Chelsea tonight. City only had 1 big chance last night, and they scored 2 goals. It's one of those great times when Riyad Mahrez has scored a goal even when he shouldn't have. If Chelsea had some of that finishing and some of that in front of goal prowess, they would have scored a lot more tonight. But Man City did very well going forward.
Again, passing from both sides was excellent. Good, high, accurate passing rates, 88% for City, 91% for PSG. But, overall, in the stats, it looks like a relatively even game in terms of how the stats go. In reality, to use a cliche, it was men against boys out there, especially in the last 20 minutes. I think after City scored, Riyad Mahrez scored the second goal in the 63rd minute. The PSG boys just lost their heads.
They really did. And as a quick plug, if you listen to our podcast version of this show on Spotify, you'll get bonus content, an intro and an outro to go alongside this. And in that intro, if you've listened to the Spotify version, you will know that I am a trained primary school teacher. And genuinely, the attitude of PSG in the last 20 minutes was like me teaching my 8-year-old boys how to play football, because they were frustrated. They were taking their frustration out on each other. The other team tried to get the ball off them and they start kicking out at them. It was like watching children play football last night. The way Marco Verratti was getting on, I was so sure that he was going to get sent off.
Yeah,
he's a rat. He is such a wee aggressive boy, and he deserved to be sent off in that last 20 minutes for how feisty he was at all times. PSG have a lot of individuals. Karthik mentioned it slightly earlier on in one of the comments, and I think that was shown last night. PSG, I was talking to my brother just this afternoon. When you look at PSG, apart from Di Maria, Neymar, Mbappe, Verratti, Marquinhos, and Keylor Navas, those are good players, really good players. But every other player that they have in that starting 11 and on the bench could easily be replaced. There's not a single one that they would miss if they disappeared or were sold or their contract expired. PSG would not be gutted if anybody left, apart from those select 6 players that I've mentioned.
Yeah, and I said to you before, like, what does anybody get? Like, I don't understand what Neymar gets from being a PSG. I know it's money, but apart from the money, it's this season's an anomaly and it's a competitive domestic league. But like, I don't know. They're a weird team. It doesn't surprise me that they've never won the Champions League before, because they're kind of similar to Man City, and they've only really found this kind of global dominance as a brand in the last 5 years, maybe. But I mean, Fernandinho's maturity in drawing the stamp from Di Maria was actually I really enjoyed that. I thought it showed a level of experience that just wasn't in the PSG setup. For him to he basically did nothing. He just kind of blocked him from taking the throw in, and he just, in an effort to get the ball, has stamped on Fernandinho's feet. Then Verratti was pretty much rugby tackling people left, right, and centre. Then you had Kimpembe nearly broke Gabriel Jesus' legs. City got involved. De Bruyne was getting annoyed. Zinchenko got annoyed. I remember that at one stage. But it did get quite tense out there. You could kind of feel it even in your living room. You could kind of feel that tension in the game the last 20 minutes. Certainly because PSG were ready to kill someone. Pochettino had to come onto the pitch to calm everybody down. It was kind of mental. It really was.
It was a crazy last 20 minutes. I wouldn't have been surprised had Zinchenko turn around and hit a stone cold stunner on Marco Verratti. It was that level of mental. But it was great to watch again from a neutral standpoint. It was really interesting to see. PSG, I think just were really, really poor, and it's hard to say much more than that. And because it's frustrating. Neymar last night. This is why he came to PSG, to win the Champions League and try and show people that he was on the same level as Messi and Ronaldo. Mm-hmm. By going to PSG, he's shown that he's nowhere near the level of Messi and Ronaldo, because Ronaldo's been able to do it in a team with average enough players beside him. Messi has done the same for the last few seasons now at Barcelona. Neymar's surrounded by average players, and they're an average team that are playing in an average league. The thing with England is you play at least 10 big games a season in the Premier League. You play big games against Liverpool, against United, against Chelsea, against Tottenham, even against Arsenal, despite the fact how rubbish they are at times. Still a big game. This season, West Ham is a big game. This season, Leicester's a big game. You're playing a lot of big games that have a lot of stakes. In the French League, you're not. In the French League, you're not playing big games week in and week out. You're playing the occasional big game. They'll slip up against an Angers, which is just ridiculous. And PSG just aren't used to a high level of competition. And so I think fair play to the Spanish teams for being able to do it. Spanish teams can do it with playing fewer big games, but PSG aren't at that level yet.
How do you think PSG would do in the Premier League? If let's say they were to come instead of Sheffield United, for example, right? Where do you think they would finish up?
That's a really tough question, because if you took this squad in my mind resembles an Arsenal squad right now. Genuinely. If Aubameyang was 10 years younger, he'd be like Mbappe, and if Pepe could actually kick a football, he'd be like Neymar. But this team reminds me of an Arsenal team in that there's some decent enough players, but as a whole, really average. I think this season, with no fans, probably would have finished round about where Tottenham are, because Tottenham haven't been very good this season and still doing all right. So I think probably would have finished around 5th or 6th, maybe.
I want to throw that out to the chat as well, guys. Stick in the chat, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube, where you think PSG would finish in the Premier League, should they be in the Premier League. Andy asks, how would we compare PSG's performance against City to their game a few weeks ago against Bayern, where they showed their quality then? Now, I would argue, Andy, that they didn't, because Bayern Munich had 31 shots. PSG had 7. PSG got extremely fortunate to get away with not being beaten in that game. And I would say that, yes, they had an unbelievable run because they beat Barcelona. Now, let's be clear here. Not a prime Barcelona. Not a prime Barcelona. They then went and beat Bayern Munich, but they got very, very fortunate and very lucky. And I think that Man City taught them not just one lesson, but many lessons in the last 2 games. And I think that was shown. Luke says that he dreads this because all English European finals are boring, which certainly was the truth. That was true last time.
But not true whenever United played Chelsea all those years ago.
True.
That was a good
Mhm.
final. But thoughts on Bayern? If Lewandowski played that in either of those games, Bayern Munich would have gone through.
Yep.
That's just the way it is, because they were playing Eric Choupo-Moting up top, and he did absolute bits for us at times at Stoke, but he's not a world beater, and he scored a decent number of goals for Bayern and PSG, the weird career that he's been on. But if Lewandowski had have played, one of those 31 would have gone in, and then another would have gone in, and Lewandowski genuinely could have scored six had he
Yep.
played.
Karthik says might just be a repeat of the Liverpool Spurs final. If it is a repeat of the Liverpool Spurs final, we're not doing a podcast because there'll be nothing to talk about.
One of
It'll
the
be
biggest issues, though, you might remember, is the Premier League finished a good 3 weeks before the Champions League final that year, and that was the issue. Is that they were 3 weeks out of fitness. They weren't
Mhm.
the teams that they should have been, and they had some injured players. Harry Kane wasn't fit. He wasn't fit for the game, but he still played, and it was a very average game because of that. We all wanted to see Liverpool Ajax. If you didn't want to see Liverpool Ajax, you're either a Tottenham fan or you're an idiot. And
Or you like rugby? No.
yeah, absolutely. You just don't get football at all. But I think this final will be an intriguing one because we've got a team who likes to go forward, likes to score goals. In Man City, likes to dominate possession, and that eats right into the hands of Chelsea, who like to sit back and counter attack. So it's going to be a really intriguing game because
It'll be
City are going to go
fascinating.
forward. Chelsea are also going to go forward, but Ruben Diaz will probably hold firm. But it'll be a really interesting game to see, especially considering the FA Cup semi-final and the game this weekend. I'll
Mhm.
be really intrigued to see what goes down in those games.
Well, speaking of Ruben Diaz, and speaking of defensive stats, wait until you hear some of these statistics, right? So, of the four that started the back four last night for City, so that's Kyle Walker, Zinchenko, Diaz, and John Stones. In the entire 90 minutes, they were not dribbled past once. Between them, they made 17 tackles, according to the thing I have here. Uh, Ruben Diaz and John Stones between them had 5 blocked shots. Kyle Walker and Zinchenko made 4 interceptions. And Ruben Diaz and John Stones cleared the ball 8 times. I don't know about the other two. But I just wanted to highlight the not dribbled past once. That City defence were not dribbled past once last night.
But that's
Isn't that
you
crazy?
look at the team they were playing. Had Mbappe played, I think that would have been a different statistic.
Mm.
Neymar doesn't really at the moment look like dribbling past anybody. He doesn't look like the type of player who he's every time he's trying to skill and cut back in on his right foot, and it's weird. He needs to just go for it down the outside. I don't know if he's just fed up of getting kicked all the time or whatever it is. But I'm not surprised by that. I saw a tweet earlier that highlighted that Ruben Diaz has come in and made a £200 million defense look like a £200 million defense. And you know what? Fair play. He has. He's
He
come
has.
in and he's actually made them look like the amount of money that they do cost.
He's been fantastic.
He has been really good. And I think you have to cut some slack for City because both Walker and John Stones were only the price that they were because at the time they were English. Well, they're still English. They haven't changed nationalities. But at the time, English players were going for even more than all players, whereas now all players go for a ridiculous amount of money. But at the time, English players were massively inflated. And
Mm.
so at the time, it looked mad. But now, looking back, it doesn't actually look that bad.
Yeah. I mean, this is where it becomes a difficult conversation now because I honestly could not tell you. And last week I was very bold and I said, whoever wins Man City PSG wins the Champions League. But after watching Chelsea today, I honestly have no idea. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this game went to penalties.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a 0-0. It would be like a 2-2. You know, like it won't be a. I don't think it'll be a low scoring game because I don't think Chelsea and City have that in them. As you know, because City will probably score because Phil Foden will do something outrageous, and then Chelsea will have to go and score, and they will because Pulisic is very good up front. Furner's got a lot of pace. Mount is very good in the midfield. I think it's going to be. I think it could be really, really intriguing.
Based on how this season has gone, Phil Foden and Riyad Mahrez will score for City, and Chelsea
Yeah.
will have 43 shots, 23 big chances. Timo Werner will score accidentally off his backside, and Christian Pulisic will rainbow flick the whole Man City team and then put it wide before Mason Mount scores from 20 yards to equalise. That's how the game's going to go, and you'll hear Christian Pulisic in the background going, "Oh heck, man!" And then it'll be a wild time. But I'm excited for the game. I am excited for the game. I think it'll be a good final. But statistically, Chelsea aren't going to score more than 2. They don't do that. They don't score more than 2.
Well remembered. Well
So
remembered.
if I'm Manchester City, I'm going out to try and score 3 because Chelsea can't do that.
Yeah.
It's like Liverpool back when they had SAS or whatever their strike force was called. And they had Sturridge and Sterling and Suarez, and whenever they had that, they would go out and they nearly won the league by outscoring everybody. And I think that's what Man City need to do in this case, is they just need to get a few goals on the board, hope for the best, and hope not to get counterattacked.
Well, at the end of the day, you have to score more than the other team to win a game. So
true.
That's all you need. One thing I just want to bring up very briefly before we go off here is I was watching. I don't know if you've heard of. Do you know Mark Goldbridge, or have you heard of Mark Goldbridge?
Yeah.
Who does the United Stand?
Yes.
He was chatting today about United's desperation to keep Cavani, because he scored a lot of goals for them or whatever. But then he was talking about how teams like Chelsea and City and Liverpool wouldn't go out of their way to try and keep a 34-year-old striker. In fact, look at City letting Aguero go, who's 32. But the thing for me, and I think this is relevant, and I know it doesn't seem relevant right now, but United don't have a sports analytics department. So their scouting comes from video footage rather than from stats. Whereas City have their own separate company that do sports analytics, and Liverpool have their own sports analytics department. Chelsea have started their own sports analytics department. These big clubs now, the rise of sports analytics in football especially, has caused these big teams to do even better. You've seen the likes of Stat Sports, who are based here in Newry. They've got their things. And it's the teams that invest in this data analytics and sports analytics that are now exceeding beyond your traditional big clubs. I'm pretty sure Leicester have a bit of a sports analytics department as well, which is why they're able to bring in players who you wouldn't really heard of, who consistently play well.
Yeah.
And then they, come in and do well.
Well, Man City had an advantage because they had their own Vincent company before they got their sports analytics company.
That's not even funny.
They were helped in that sense.
I'm cutting off from the podcast.
I think it is harsh though in a way to say that, because when you base on performance, Cavani has come up big whenever they've needed him. He's been a really good player this season, and I do think he's not a starter for United, and he deserves to get a contract for another year. You have him playing behind Martial, as in second in the pecking order to Martial or Greenwood or Rashford or whoever it is they're playing up top. Any of those three, it would be fine. But I think he's a good backup player to have. Aguero, completely differently this season, has looked off the pace since he's come back. Hasn't looked the same player. It makes sense to let him go because he's on massive wages as well. So I think that's fair. Chelsea have Olivier Giroud still in their books. He's probably going to leave this summer, but he is still there, and I'm intrigued to see what happens to him. But yeah, it's a fair point. I think if you start to look sports analytically, then yeah, Cavani probably wouldn't be playing in a Manchester United team. But Ole seems to be doing a decent enough job, so we can't really argue when Cavani scored 2 last week against Roma and just played really well all round. So fair play to him.
Yeah, he got a 9.5 last week. He was second only to Bruno Fernandes, so can't really complain. But guys, that is our show, I think, for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow, immediately after the Europa League, depending on what time the Arsenal game finishes, because that United game isn't going to extra time. But the
you never know. Dude,
nah,
you never know.
I'm going to go.
We could score 6. All right.
I'm going out on a limb, and I'm saying it's not going to extra time. But we will be live as soon as the Europa League games finish with our Europa League semi-final reaction, which will take the same form as tonight's show. But thank you very much for watching, for joining us. As always, let me just quickly mention podcasts in the description of this video if you want to go and check out the podcasts. me and Luke would really, really appreciate it, because that's really where we're trying to grow, is our podcast. There's bonus content on the podcast for audio only listeners, because we prefer them to you guys who are watching live. And make sure to give a like on this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to grow that to 100 subs. And thank you so much for watching. Luke, thank you so much for joining me, as always.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you very much. And just to make things clear, I do not prefer the audio-only listeners. I love everyone equally. That's all on Joe. So give Joe some hate on Twitter, Facebook, wherever.
Yes, thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow night. Goodbye.